I heard a snap, and then the whole world fell on me. The tent roof suddenly dropped on me, which made the snow and ice fall straight onto my face. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped under the frozen fabric. I started clawing through the snow, trying to find a way out. My fingers were numb and were burning at the same time. When I finally pulled myself out of it, everything around me was white and silent. The tent was crushed. The ropes were torn apart. The storm had taken over everything. My camera lens was frozen, my food was buried, and I was shaking so hard I couldn't even speak. I tried to stand up, but my leg gave up. I had fallen hard earlier while collecting wood. Pain shot through my knee. But I couldn't stop because if I didn't rebuild it fast, I'd freeze right there. That night, I realized that this wasn't a camping trip anymore. This was survival in its purest form. Man against nature. One mistake away from death. The moment I stepped out of the truck, the wind hit me hard. It wasn't a normal breeze. It was thick, heavy, and sharp enough to sting, even through my jacket. The thermometer showed -62. Out here, that's not just cold, that's danger. In this kind of weather, even your breath freezes before it hits the ground. I had read stories about people who say metal cracks like glass at these temperatures. Now I understood what they meant. My camera lens froze within minutes. The buttons wouldn't move, the screen turned black. Every sound felt distant. No birds, no people. I started walking and tried to scan for a flat spot to build my camp. You can't just set up a tent anywhere out here, because if you choose a low spot, the wind buries you. If you pick a slope, the snow slides down on top of you. So, I needed a space high enough to stay away from the fear of being drowned in the snow and getting some shelter to block the wind. After half an hour, my hands were completely numb. Even with double gloves, my fingers felt like wood. I spotted a small group of trees, half bent from the weight of snow. That was my best chance, because the branches could block some of the wind. The snow was so deep that I was in the snow on my waist level. I set my backpack down, opened it, and pulled out the tent poles. They were already sticking together with frost. My water bottle was solid ice. I shook it. Nothing moved inside. The temperature was so low that even my phone battery died instantly. Everything I had depended on the next few hours, the tent, the fire, and whether I could get the stove burning before the blizzard arrived, I could see dark clouds rolling in fast. The air had that strange silence that always comes before a storm. I looked around but it was endless white in every direction. No help, no noise, no light. This was it, and no turning back now. As I took a deep breath, snow started falling again, light at first, then faster. I pulled my hood tighter and whispered to myself, "This is where I make it, or I don't." The snow was still falling, and the wind had grown sharper. I had to kneel down in the thick white powder to clear a flat patch for the tent. Every time I digged the shovel in snow, it felt heavier than the last. The flakes kept piling back. Finally, I had a small space that was level enough to build on. I pulled out the tent poles, but my gloves were already very stiff. Even bending the metal felt impossible. In these temperatures, even the simplest task becomes a fight. Step by step, I began setting up the tent. Poles first, then the fabric stretched over the frame. Anchors had to be hammered deep into the frozen ground. I used ice stakes and buried them under hard snow to hold the tent against the wind. Every move took 10 times longer than I imagined. My body was shaking, and the wind stole the warmth right out of me. Next came the stove. I tried my lighter. Nothing. Matches? Wet and useless. I grabbed tiny twigs and pine needles from the snow, trying to light a flame. Minutes felt like hours. Every gust of wind threatened me to blow my tent down before it was even secure. Snow kept going inside. It was covering my gear and burying my gloves and backpack under the snow. If I didn't get this fire going, I wouldn't survive the night. Finally, a small spark. It flickered, then caught. The twigs started to burn. The fire was weak at first, but then it grew slowly, a small circle of warmth in this freezing weather. I climbed inside the tent and felt the first hint of heat on my frozen face. I sat there for a moment, letting the warmth reach inside me. Outside, the storm raged. It was relentless. On the inside, I had built a small fortress, a fragile bubble of life in the middle of a frozen wasteland. Every step, every struggle, every second of frustration had led to the fire burning, the tent standing, and me still alive. But I knew this was just the beginning. The storm wouldn't stop, the temperature wouldn't rise, and the night ahead would be very, very long. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth for the first time, and whispered to myself, "I'm not done yet. I have to survive this, no matter what." I looked around my shelter, looking at my stuff. Every item mattered. Every gram counted. Out here, you can't carry anything unnecessary. 1 extra pound could make the difference between life and death. I had my stove. It was the heart of my camp. Without it, I would freeze in minutes. A sleeping bag, an axe and knife. These were the tools used for chopping firewood, cutting branches, and defending myself if I had to. Food was my lifeline there. I needed something fully packed with energy. The kind that could keep me alive even if I was too weak to move. A had a small backup heater as well. Something that would help me get a little extra warmth. Even my water bottle was frozen solid. I had to make choices. Comfort had to come second. Survival had to come first. I left behind extra clothes, extra gadgets, even snacks. Every unnecessary item that would slow me down or weigh me down to melt the snow. I used the stove carefully, heating it in a metal cup. It was slow work, but drinking it kept me alive. I stacked up some branches under the floor of the tent to add some extra insulation, making a small barrier between me and the frozen ground. I learned these small tricks from years of cold survival guides and my experience. Then I wrapped my metal tools in cloth so my hands wouldn't stick to them. I slept, keeping my boots inside my backpack so they wouldn't freeze solid overnight. Every little hack mattered here. Every preparation counted. Out here, nature doesn't care about you. The cold is merciless, and the wind is unforgiving. And if you forget even one small thing, it can cost you everything. Looking at my gear, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving because of my fire or my tent. I was surviving because I had come prepared, because I had thought ahead of time, and because I respected the power of this frozen wasteland. The intensity of the wind increased, and suddenly, it wasn't just a cold breeze anymore. It was a roar, a force that pushed against my body, bending the tent like it was made of paper ropes of the tent were stretching and creaking under pressure. Snow started piling on top, heavier and faster than I expected. The storm hit full power. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I couldn't see beyond a few feet. Even my own breath fogged instantly, freezing on my scarf and helmet. Minutes felt like hours. The tent shook with every blast of wind. Poles bent under the weight of ice. Ropes snapped. Then it happened. The tent collapsed. I was buried halfway, trapped under frozen fabric. Snow against my chest, making taking every breath as a struggle. I was panicking, but I forced myself to stay calm. I clawed at the snow, digging with my gloved hands. My fingers were stiff, eyes stinging, and my heart pounding. I could barely move. When I finally pulled myself free, the storm was still screaming around me. Everything I had carefully set up was buried. My stove, my knife, even my heater were under a thick layer of ice and snow. I dug, shaking and desperate not to lose the gear I depended on to survive piece by piece. I started rebuilding the tent. Every single pole had to be bent and secured against the relentless wind. It felt impossible. Every gust threatened to undo all my work. My fingers were numb, my legs weak, and my lungs burned with every breath. Hours passed. I lost track of time. Slowly but painfully, I got it standing again. Inside the rebuilt tent, I checked my gear. Everything was covered in frost, but thankfully, I had it back. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't comfortable, but it was alive. I was alive. And I knew that this was only the beginning. The blizzard hadn't stopped. The night was long, but if I could survive this collapse, I could survive almost anything. Next morning was not a relief at all. Everything was frozen solid. The ground, the tent, even the firewood I had chopped the day before. When I stepped outside, my boots were crunching on hard ice. The slightest slip could mean disaster. And then it happened. My foot slipped, and I went sliding over the ice. My shoulder smashed into a rock, and my leg twisted. A wave of pain tore through my body. I kept moving. I picked up my axe and started chopping frozen branches. The wood was solid ice. Every strike required double the effort. Then the axe slipped. Blood trickled down my hand, freezing almost instantly as it touched my gloves. I stared at it. Even lifting the axe again felt impossible. Every single muscle ached. I wrapped my hand in cloth and tried to stay calm. There was no hospital, no warm bed. Just me, the snow, and the fight to survive. I whispered to the camera, my voice shaking. I didn't come here to quit. Breathing heavy, I kept going, focusing on one task at a time. Every branch collected, every firewood piece chopped, was a victory against the cold. I had to work fast. The longer I stayed still, the more the cold attacked. Fingers, toes, nose, everything felt like it was slowly turning to ice. The pain was relentless. My shoulder throbbed from the fall. My hand burned and numbed at the same time. But giving up wasn't an option. I had survived the blizzard. I had rebuilt the tent. And now, I had to survive my own body. It was bloody, exhausting, and painful. But the satisfaction of pushing through, of holding on despite injuries, was unmatched. And I knew this struggle was far from over. The temperature kept dropping. The little heater I had was struggling, and then it died completely. I tried moving, but my limbs were heavy. Breathing was a battle. Each inhale burned like fire, and every exhale froze instantly on my face. I could feel sleep creeping in and in minus 62 degrees Celsius. Sleep isn't rest. Sleep is death. I forced myself to stay awake, slamming my hands on the frozen ground, shaking every inch of my body. I almost gave in once, sitting down on the icy floor, closing my eyes for just a second, and almost lost everything. For a moment, I just sat, chest heaving. Staring at the fire, I realized how close I had come. Minutes from freezing, from passing out, and never waking up. This wasn't adventure anymore. This wasn't camping. This was pure survival. I whispered to the camera, "You have no idea how small decisions matter here. 1 second of weakness, one mistake, and it's over." But I didn't give in. I refused to give in. It was the middle of the night. Everything was silent except the sound of the wind. And then I heard it, a rustling sound, low and heavy. At first, I froze. My heart started racing. I grabbed my axe, flashlight shaking in my numb hands. I slowly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The snow crunched under my boots. Then I saw them, a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. Wolves? Wild dogs? My stomach dropped. They were drawn by the smell of my food, curious, hungry, and unafraid. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I shouted as loud as I could, swinging the axe to make myself look bigger. The growls intensified. One of them lunged too close. It scratched my arm. Pain shot through me, a sharp reminder that I was alone and vulnerable. For a few tense minutes, we stood like that, eyes locked, neither side willing to back down. I shouted again, threw a branch, and slammed my boot against the snow. Slowly, carefully, they backed off. Finally, they disappeared into the darkness, leaving only tracks in the fresh snow. I rushed back into the tent, slamming the flap shut. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing, and blood from the scratch already starting to freeze. I checked the fire. It was still alive, tiny but enough to warm my frozen fingers. I sat by it, trembling, staring at the icy walls of my tent. That night, I realized that the storm wasn't my only danger out here. Out here, even a moment of carelessness can bring life-threatening wildlife straight at your tent's door. And you have to be ready. Ready to fight and protect yourself. The storm had passed, but the cold wasn't done. I crawled out of my tent and started rebuilding my fire. I fixed the tent again, this time stronger. Every pole and every rope was secured against the wind. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I cleaned the scratch on my arm, wrapping it tightly to keep the blood from freezing. Every action reminded me that survival isn't about luck, it's about effort. I sat by the fire, catching my breath, and spoke to the camera. "It's not just cold outside," I said. "It's cold inside your head. Fear, doubt, exhaustion, they can kill you faster than the storm. But if you push through, if you refuse to give up, you can survive anything." Next morning, the first rays of sun touched the snow. Everything was covered in thick ice. The tent, the ground, the trees bending under frozen weight. It was beautiful and deadly. At the same time, I looked around, exhausted, every muscle screaming, but alive. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the fire sink in. It wasn't just survival of the body, it was survival of the mind. Out here, life feels fragile. Every heartbeat, every warm breath is a victory. And when you survive something this harsh, something this unforgiving, you realize how precious every moment is. The cold was still there. The wind still whispered. But I had won my battle. And for the first time in days, I felt hope and strength. I sit here, looking at the frozen landscape, and I can't stop thinking about everything that just happened. And if you want to see more extreme adventures, survival challenges, and stories that push the limits of human endurance, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you never miss an adventure. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.